We are now entering the second phase of the elections 2020 lawsuits. Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, and it is Monday, November 9th, 2020. We are 6 days after the US 2020 presidential elections, and we are in for a very interesting couple of months. Last week was the election. It was a very close election to the point where the media did not declare a projected winner until a few days later. I think it was Friday that the media, starting with Fox News, moving to the Associated Press, declared Joe Biden the projected president-elect of the United States of America. Trump's campaign has not yet conceded in the race. Last week, there were a few lawsuits which were dismissed because they became moot for reasons I'll explain in a moment, but the campaign has announced that as of today, the real substantive lawsuits of allegations of fraud shall begin. Now, what do I mean about the lawsuits that were filed last week and ultimately dismissed because they had become moot is that there were lawsuits filed alleging certain fraud that was depriving the observers of the ability to observe the ballot counts. Those lawsuits were ultimately dismissed because the ballots were counted, therefore the object of the lawsuit was no longer. And although there were incidental allegations of fraud on injunctive proceedings, there were no substantive allegations of fraud. Those seem to be coming in the lawsuits that are going to be filed as of today. I will be doing vlogs on those lawsuits in the future. I just got my hands on the Michigan lawsuit today, and it's a long read, so I'm going to be covering that in a future vlog. For today, I just want to go over one piece of evidence that I suspect is going to find its way into some of these lawsuits. A signed affidavit from a USPS Postal Service worker. I think that's probably redundant because the Postal Service is in the USPS. A signed affidavit from a USPS employee that was tweeted out by James O'Keefe from Project Veritas. I'm going to break it down and analyze it, not on the basis that it is the smoking gun that is going to blow the lid off this entire election cycle, just to analyze how it is drafted and the good and bad things in it and what to look for in an affidavit when analyzing it for its probative value. Probative is a legal term. It's very fancy. It makes you sound very intellectual when you say it.
Probative. It's just fun to say.
Breaking! Here is the signed affidavit from Erie, Pennsylvania, USPS whistleblower Richard Hopkins that is now in the hands of Senator Lindsey Graham and the Senate Judiciary Committee. Hashtag expose USPS. Now, for those of you who may or may not know exactly what an affidavit is, in law, an affidavit is a sworn statement from a witness that can serve in lieu of their testimony, but typically doesn't because a party nonetheless has the right to cross-examine an affiant on their affidavit. An affidavit can serve as evidence in lieu of testimony by consent of the parties if the court authorizes it, if the affiant is no longer available to testify viva voce, that is to say, in person, but it is not necessarily automatically evidence in and of itself. And with that said, let's now go through, break down, and analyze this affidavit to see just how strong it is. Affidavit of Richard Hopkins. I, Richard Hopkins, declare as follows. I am over the age of 18 years and I am legally competent to make this declaration. I have personal knowledge of the facts contained herein. If called upon, I could and would competently testify under oath as to the facts stated herein. Here we have the affiant attesting to the fact that he has personal knowledge of the facts alleged in this affidavit, personal knowledge of the alleged facts as opposed to hearsay evidence. If you need a refresher on hearsay evidence, I'm going to link one of my videos on hearsay right here.
Say?
That being said, despite assurances that the affiant has personal knowledge of the facts alleged in the affidavit, it becomes clear that a lot of the facts alleged in the affidavit are in fact pure hearsay. I am an employee of the United States Postal Service. I work as a carrier in the Erie, Pennsylvania Post Office. Although, as I understand Pennsylvania law, ballots must be postmarked by 8 p.m. on Election Day, November 3, 2020 in Pennsylvania. Postmaster Rob Weisenbach directed my co-workers and I to pick up ballots after Election Day and provide them to him. As discussed more fully below, I heard Weisenbach tell a supervisor at my office that Weisenbach was backdating the postmarks on the ballots to make it appear as though the ballots had been collected on November 3, 2020, despite them in fact being collected on November 4 and possibly later. Reading this affidavit as a lawyer, it is painfully obvious that it was in fact drafted by a lawyer and not by the affiant himself, but this really is par for the course in law. Very rarely, if ever, are the affidavits actually drafted by the affiants themselves. They are always drafted and vetted and re-vetted by lawyers. But what I don't like in particular about the first allegation allegation, the first substantive allegation in this affidavit, is that it alleges an understanding of law, and you're not really supposed to allege law in an affidavit because it is only supposed to be about the person's knowledge of personal facts and not about the state of the law. In reality, the law should be kept out of the affidavit and only facts should be alleged in the affidavit to be merged with arguments in law, but this is a decision that whoever drafted the affidavit made. It's not determinate one way or the other, it just reads like it was drafted by a lawyer, which might not be the best look to give this affidavit. The second thing I don't like about the first allegation in this affidavit, and it is a more substantive disagreement, this allegation is pure hearsay. As discussed more fully below,
I heard Weissenbach tell a supervisor at my office
that Weissenbach was backdating the postmarks on the ballots. The affiant heard Weissenbach say to another person, that is literally hearsay, hearing what someone else said to someone else. It might serve as a commencement of evidence, but it's still a little bit of the hearsay-ish type. On November 5, 2020, as I was preparing my mail for delivery, I saw Weissenbach with Daryl Locke, one of the supervisors for the Erie, Pennsylvania post office, having a discussion. Weissenbach and Locke discussed how on November 4, 2020, they had backdated the postmark on all but one of the ballots collected on November 4, 2020 to make it appear as though the ballots had instead been collected on November 3, 2020. I overheard Weissenbach tell Locke that they, quote, messed up yesterday, end quote, November 4, 2020 by accidentally postmarking one ballot as having been collected November 4, 2020, when it had actually been collected. Again, more hearsay evidence as to what the affiant heard Weissenbach say to Locke, but you know that this is just sort of the beginning of the evidence, and the lawyers for the affiant are going to say, I'm not trying to prove that those statements that Weissenbach made to Locke are in fact correct. I'm just trying to prove that the affiant heard them. I will make my evidence through other means. This affidavit is presumably just the beginning of the evidence and not all of the evidence, because if this is all of the evidence they have, well, it is just going to be hearsay evidence then. Importantly, Weissenbach and his assistant had ordered my co-workers and I to continue picking up ballots after November 3, despite the requirement that ballots be mailed by then. And appreciate this, what Weissenbach and his assistant might have ordered to the other co-workers, hearsay. What he ordered to the affiant is direct personal knowledge of the facts. Weissenbach directed that ballots be picked up through Friday, November 6, 2020. Moreover, Weissenbach directed that all ballots picked up through November 6, 2020 were to be given to him, presumably so they could be backdated by him and or Locke. Important observation on that last sentence, to the extent that the first half of that sentence is in fact based on the affiant's own personal knowledge, the second half of that sentence is pure affiant conjecture. It is not a statement of the affiant's personal knowledge of fact, it is a statement of the affiant's personal belief as to what happened after he did what he was instructed to do, according to the affidavit. My understanding of Pennsylvania law is that ballots cannot be counted unless they were mailed by 8 p.m. on November 3, 2020. Again, the affiant's understanding of Pennsylvania law is not a question of fact or his personal knowledge, it is a question of his personal understanding, a matter of opinion. It's sort of irrelevant as well because Pennsylvania law is what it is the facts that we are interested in right now. So let's see what those facts are. Weissenbach's comments were deeply concerning to me and appeared to me to be an attempt by Weissenbach and or Locke to improperly backdate ballots received after the legal deadline so these late ballots could be counted. Something I understand to be illegal and against Pennsylvania law. Accordingly, I brought Weissenbach's information to the public through Project Veritas. The next day, November 6, I was interrogated by a USPS postal inspector who, knowing I was the whistleblower who brought Weissenbach's directives to light, indicated they were investigating the matter. I was also approached by a representative of the Postal Worker Union who began asking me about old allegations against me which have long been resolved. I refused to be silent, so I decided to reveal my identity and have pledged to testify regarding what I heard and what I was ordered to do. Now, this allegation is particularly interesting because it shows you that the affiant knows what is coming, and that is going to be a full-on assault of the affiant's character. A full-on assault on this affiant's work history, work performance. They are going to try to dredge up anything they can on this affiant to undermine the substance of his affidavit, and that also is just par for the course in law. That is why affidavits typically don't stand as standalone evidence, because every party gets to cross-examine the affiant in order to undermine that affiant's credibility. And by the sounds of it, it sounds like this affiant has something of a history that he knows is going to be used against him in order to undermine his credibility, and he is sort of trying to turn that bad thing into a good thing to say that he is not going to be silenced by threats of them bringing up his history. The affidavit then ends with the standard certification that the affiant knows that they will be held in perjury if they make a false statement in the affidavit, and that is just to reassure everyone reading this that the affiant knows that there are penalties for lying in this affidavit. I, Richard Hopkins, hereby state that the facts above set forth are true and correct, or are true and correct to the best of my knowledge, information, and belief. I understand that the statements herein are made subject to the penalties of 18 PA/CS Section 4904 relating to unsworn falsification to authorities. I further declare under penalty of perjury under the laws of the United States of America that the foregoing is true and correct. Executed on this 6th day of November 2020 at Erie, Pennsylvania. Richard Hopkins. And 18 PA/CS Section 4904 reads as follows. In general, a person commits a misdemeanor of the second degree if, with intent to mislead a public servant in performing his official function, he 1. Makes any written false statement which he does not believe to be true. 2. Submits or invites reliance on any writing which he knows to be forged, altered, or otherwise lacking in authenticity. Or 3. Submits or invites reliance on any sample, specimen, map, boundary mark, or other object which he knows to be false. D. Penalty. In addition to any other penalty that may be imposed, a person convicted under this section shall be sentenced to pay a fine of at least $1,000. So that is the affidavit, and as you can see, the affidavit can sort of be broken down into 3 aspects. One aspect of it is the affiant's understanding of Pennsylvania law, which is totally irrelevant. The second interesting element of this affidavit is that which the affiant says Weissenbach, Locke, and his assistant might have told other co-workers, and that is also pretty much irrelevant unless the affiant himself heard what they said to the other co-workers, because otherwise it is just hearsay to which he was not even a part. The third and obviously most powerful, most important part of this affidavit is that which the affiant was witness to himself, what was told to him, and what he heard other people say among themselves, even if those things were not directly said to him. The argument is going to be, we don't know what was actually done, if Weissenbach and Locke actually backdated the documents. All that we know is that the affiant testifies to the fact that he was told to collect it and that he heard them saying they were going to do it. Whether or not the affiant actually picked up ballots after the date in question and remitted them to Weissenbach and Locke, whether or not Weissenbach and Locke in fact then proceeded to post-date those documents, that is going to be subject to evidence of itself, and if they don't have that evidence, you're going to have a problem with this lawsuit. But at the very least, for now, you have an affiant who says that he heard that people were going to do something, subject to evidence of them actually having done it. Alright, so that is the affidavit. To be continued to see where this all goes. We'll be covering the lawsuits as they are issued, and we'll be delving into them, and I will be discussing them with Robert Barnes during our weekly live streams on Sunday nights, 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Tune into the live streams, follow Robert Barnes and I on Locals. It is vivabarneslaw.locals.com. And if you like my videos and you like my content, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a comment in the comment section below because it feeds the algorithm. If you want to support the channel, all of these support links are in the pinned comment. We've got PayPal, Patreon, subscribe to our YouTube membership. We've got merch, but more important than any of that, take care of yourselves, check in on friends and family, make sure everyone around you is doing well, and now you know your vlog. Peace out.